edible insects have garnered a ton of publicity over the last couple of years, but is all the hype really warranted? And what insect-based ingredients have commercial potential beyond whole cricket powder? So first of all, what are insects made of, and is there a big variation between different types?
There's a massive amount of variation. If you look at just protein across a wide variety of insects, according to the FAO, you're looking at somewhere between 11 and over 70%. And even if you look at closely related species, like two different grasshopper species, you can still see a good bit of variety.
Okay.
And so part of it is differences in species. Part of it probably has to do with differences in the diet that they ate and differences in the life stage. I mean, I hate to go back to the old-fashioned, but it's a very complex system.
Okay, so looking at some of these individual components, which do you think have the most, commercial potential as, high-value food ingredients? If any.
So definitely proteins, because they make up a significant fraction of the fresh weight. And they have some interesting functional properties. We've seen waxworm protein has a lot of functionality similar to egg protein.
Okay.
So when you've got something which is most of the animal and you're able to extract that, then that is something which gives you some value. Moving on, there's a good amount of fat, about roughly 10 to 20% fat on the dry basis. So after you remove all the moisture. And it's mostly unsaturated fats. Now, I don't think we'll ever see, fried in cricket oil.
Yeah, would that really be cost efficient?
No, not at all, because you're dealing with tiny fractions of a tiny thing. But as an additive, as a health thing, the other thing is that insects are unable to synthesize sterols. And they're only able to modify certain sterols into the cholesterol they need. They do have cholesterol, like most animals.
So they're getting the sterols from the plants that they're eating.
But some of them they can't do anything with, and they accumulate. So there's a possibility with feeding you could create an insect oil which was high in certain levels of sterols. Other thing is, and this is one that's we have a good bit of history with, are colorants. Okay, now. Here recently, traditionally, we've mainly worked with crickets, maybe mealworms, waxworms a little bit. Those aren't very colorful creatures. I mean, they're all a nice shade of brown. But there are other insects which are quite well colored. I mean, probably the most famous is cochineal, where they get carmine.
Okay, so that's a bright red color.
Vivid red. So there's also a lot of insects which are pearlescent or opalescent on their shells, and there's a possibility those shells could be removed and ground into a fine powder, and they would preserve that. So it'd make an interesting, put it in your next bottle of Vinique now with beetle shell.
What about chitin? That's the kind of the hard exoskeleton.
Yes.
Is that something that people are trying to get rid of, or could that potentially have some application?
Well, when you're making a powder, it causes a problem because it's a hard thing. It's not water soluble. It's non-digestible, so it acts as fiber, which is sort of a good thing. But it also is tied up with all those other things, so it's sort of dark and funky looking.
Right.
So removing that would be a good thing. But once you remove the chitin, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. You can modify it into chitosan, right? And there's been a lot of research with crustacean shellfish, mostly, looking at extracting the chitin and then modifying it into chitosan. It has antimicrobial activity. It can make edible food coatings. They've talked about using it for coating in industrial purposes to protect stuff. Because it's useful because unlike chitin, which is just insoluble, chitosan is soluble in acidic solutions and fairly weak ones, like roughly the strength of home vinegar.
Okay.
You can dissolve chitosan in, and then if you apply it to something, it will form a nice coating once the liquid evaporates.
So of these various applications, are you getting a sense in terms of who's putting the money in or who's doing the research, which potentially could go to market, if any of them earlier than others? Or?
Well, so the research thing is very interesting. It's a fair, even though humans have been eating insects for millennia, it's a fairly newly interested area.
Embryonic.
Yes, there you go. Beautiful word. So you find that you have younger faculty, junior faculty researching it because it's relatively easy to work with. You can do tests which are well established to determine whipping or emulsification ability, that sort of thing, and it gives you good data. There are several companies that have become interested in, and some of them are doing commercial applications right now. But basically, they stop the research once they get an acceptable product.
Right.
So if they're making fudgy brownie bars, they're not really worried about coming up with a process that will have a lighter color because, well, all the cocoa, it's already black.